two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with my husband, Wayles Browne, who is also a longtime member of Ithaca DSA and, in fact, the treasurer these days. And he's going to tell us about a campaign that he has become involved in, DSA's work to save the U.S. Post Office. Let's start with some history. Say a few words about the origins of the U.S. Post Office.
Well, it started with Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin was the first in quite a number of ways. He was our first scientist that had a European reputation, and he was one of the first newspaper printers in the colonies, and he was one of the activists around the Declaration of Independence. But even under the British, he was a postmaster, not the postmaster. And then the Continental Congress put him in as postmaster for the budding United States in 1775, so even before they declared independence. They could realize the importance of having a post office to deliver letters, but also to deliver newspapers. They figured newspapers were a vital tool in setting up a free society. So he was the first Postmaster General of the United States, and that was part of the federal government. It went on being part of the federal government. In fact, in the 1800s, he was made one of the cabinet departments. So the Postmaster General would be sitting in the president's cabinet together with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Army and so on.
Well, is it still a department of the federal government?
Unfortunately, it's not. There was a bill passed in 1970-71 that made the post office into a sort of separate entity, still loosely connected with the government, but the rest of the government couldn't run it. And it was renamed the United States Postal Service, still had a Postmaster General, but the Postmaster General was named by a board of governors, which looked awfully much like the board of directors of a private company. But the president was supposed to nominate the governors, and then they would be confirmed by the Senate. So that much is like other parts of the government. But then they would hire the Postmaster General, and the president couldn't fire the Postmaster General or suggest a new one. And that's still true, unfortunately.
So under this new, semi-private structure, how has the post office been doing? Did it make things better?
No, in a word, it didn't seem to be better after 1970-71, and it got even worse after 2006 because Congress passed a special bill on reconstructing the post office, brought in a postal rates commission that would look at what the postage rates would be. But it also said that the post office had to put money down for 50 years ahead. Some sources say 75, but I've seen 50 years ahead to provide for the healthcare benefits and the retirement benefits of its employee. And that meant placing a whole lot of money in the US Treasury. And apparently Mr. Bush, who was president at the time, felt it would be nice to have that money in the Treasury. It wouldn't look so much as if the federal government was running a deficit. On the other hand, it meant the post office really was running a deficit. And it's been running a deficit most years since then, not quite all years since 2006, but most years. And it's way in the hole now because it's had to set aside that money, billions every year, to be ready to pay retirement benefits.
So it's technically in the hole, but actually has this huge reserve for the future that it isn't allowed to use.
Yes.
So it's a little perverse. And I take it this is an arrangement that is unique to the post office, or
that's right. No company has to do that, and no part of the federal government has to pay its benefits down way ahead into the future either.
And yet it is, while it may not be quite as uniquely important for spreading the news as newspapers were in the year 1800, let us say, when there was no television, no internet, no telephones, no radio, none of that.
Right.
But still, newspapers are important. Our letters are, I think, even more important. And also, we now have a lot of correspondence that's worldwide. So how does the U.S. Post Office relate to post offices around the world?
Okay, bit of history. It has been possible, say, to send letters back and forth to England, even when we were breaking away from England, or to send letters from and to France. But the post offices of the different countries decided to get a bit more organized together. And in 1874, they signed an agreement in Geneva, Switzerland, to set up the Universal Postal Union. And all the post offices could be part of that. That is, the countries had to sign the agreement, and the United States signed on too. And that had provisions about how post offices of different countries would exchange mail, how the mail going to Italy would be handed over to Italy, and mail coming from Italy would be received in this country, and so on. And that has functioned very well over the years. It involves some money changing hands between the countries. And they set up a sort of tier system so that countries with a lower per capita income could pay a bit less in the way of dues than countries with a high per capita income. And of course, the US is a country with a high per capita income. And China has been a country with a low per capita income on the average. It's certainly been increasing the per capita income, but still per person, it's not up with the US yet. And so in 2018, the United States under the Trump administration, followed by Canada, complained to the Universal Postal Union that China was able to send mail to the US at a cut rate. And it was actually cheaper for a Chinese person to send a package to the US than for an American person to send a package within the US. The Trump administration threatened to leave the Universal Postal Union within a year unless that was somehow rectified. And they did find a compromise that seemed to satisfy the US. So the US never did actually leave, but even the threat of leaving was not good for public relations around the world, and not good for confidence in our different national post offices.
So one more way in which the US kind of made a fool of itself before the world.
We could say that, yes. And made us look bad, as the phrase is.
So that change that Trump was trying to make, pulling out of the postal union, didn't happen.
Mhm.
But I think he set in motion a lot of other changes, and some of them did take effect.
Yeah, well, it's not entirely him because the post office under its non-elected postmaster general had been putting some changes into effect even during the Obama administration and before. They wanted to close some small local post offices, and Congress stepped in and said they shouldn't do that. And they wanted to move some mail sorting facilities to larger centers. And that really did happen around here even before Trump. Our mail had been sorted right here in the Ithaca post office, and then it started being sent to Rochester to be sorted. Even mail that was going to come back to our Ithaca zip code. So that meant moving a lot more letters and envelopes by truck up to Rochester and back. But Trump accelerated this, or wanted to close more post offices, consolidate mail sorting, and that meant shutting down some mail sorting machines because even in local post offices, they had machines where a clerk would just press a few keys, depending on what the zip code would be, and the letters would be sent into one bin or sent into another bin. And that saved a lot of time. But when the present Postmaster General came in, and that was in 2020, he immediately moved to shut down even more local post offices and shut down many more postal sorting machines, mail sorting machines, and have them taken apart, and so they couldn't be reinstalled. And this was a bad idea all around. The present Postmaster General was nominated by actually not the whole Post Office Board of Governors because there was a weird little regime in effect. The board passed a resolution that said a subset of it would be able to act as though it had full power. And that's the subset that put in Louis DeJoy, an old friend of Trump's, although on paper he was a Democrat. And I can talk a bit about his background. It's interesting. He was a Republican politician, Republican fundraiser, already under suspicion in the state of North Carolina for trying to get around the election laws. He was running companies, and he told the employees at one of his companies, "You contribute to the Republican campaigns, and I'll give you back the money." And that is
that's illegal.
Unlawful. It is. It is. You could have told them that. Yeah, and in fact, there was an investigation started in North Carolina. It's not clear if it's going anywhere. But anyway, that meant he was a favorite of the Republicans. And Trump had his pocket subset of the Postal Board of Governors put him in 2020 after the previous Postmaster General finished her term. She had been the first ever female Postmaster General and had experience as a postal letter carrier in her background.
Wow.
But still, she was somewhat more in the pocket of the Republicans than one would have wanted. So she went along with some of these proposed changes and consolidations and steps toward privatization. And then her term was over and Mr. DeJoy came in the middle of the year, and immediately he started doing more post office closings and pushing a plan that he wrote called the 10-year plan. And that was to do quite a number of things to the post office. It was going to raise postal rates. It was going to slow down delivery of first-class mail. And one of the provisions was first-class mail over some distances, not local, but over some distances within the US, instead of being guaranteed a delivery in 3 days, he was now going to get there in 5 days. And the Postal Rates Commission was supposed to pass on this, see if it was okay. And Mr. DeJoy claimed that what was most important for first-class mail users was not fast delivery, but knowing when you would get delivery. And some tens of thousands of people wrote into the Postal Rates Commission, including me, saying, no, we want fast delivery. It's not important to be assured that we'd get delivery in 5 days. But they went ahead and approved it anyway. It took effect on October 1st of the present year.
Of the present year.
Yeah. And so did increases in postal rates. Maybe you know. If you want to buy a first-class stamp, it's called a forever stamp. You don't pay 55 cents anymore. You pay 58 cents.
Okay, so the post office is going to the dogs.
Yes,
mail
we can
is
say that.
slower, mail is more expensive, at least the first class mail and postcards that we rely on a lot.
Yeah, and this became very sensitive to Congress in late 2020 because more voters than ever before wanted to vote by mail. And voting by mail involved at least one and possibly two passages through the mail system. You could ask for your ballot, and unless you went down to the Board of Election yourself, your ballot would be sent to you through the mail. And then you'd fill it out and sign the envelope and send it back. And that would have to go through the mail. So
yes, and I think we know that that's dangerous. In fact, I believe I once lost, the one time I ran for office, I lost by 2 votes, and we figured it was slow international mail that was at fault.
Slow international mail,
because
and I think, yes,
we knew which ballots didn't come, whose ballots didn't come in.
I think we can say the country they were coming from. It was 3 people from Ithaca who were studying abroad in Italy.
Yes, okay. But that was long ago. You talked about 2020 and the election of 2020. And of course, the result of that is that now Biden is president. So what can Biden do about this?
Well, he can name new members to the Post Office Board of Governors. And I think he could fire the existing members. He doesn't seem to have wanted to do that. But there are 2 members whose terms expire on December 8th of this year. Mr. Ron Bloom and Mr. what's his name, John Barger. And Ron Bloom is a holdover. His term was really supposed to expire on December 8th of last year, but there's a provision that he can stay in for another year if he isn't replaced. But his term definitely expires on December 8th of this year. Meanwhile, the Board of Governors voted to make him chairman of the Board of Governors. So he is that at the moment. He is a Democrat on paper, and he has an interesting history. Early in his career, he was a negotiator for unions, and he got the steel workers union some good settlements, and he represented them when they were trying to get some steel companies to not actually go bankrupt, because going bankrupt would mean they'd lose all their obligations to workers. But that was back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Since then, he's become much more of a corporate person. And so therefore, a friend of President Trump's. And President Trump was happy to have him on the Postal Board of Governors because on paper he's a Democrat, so he contributes to the balance between political parties. And Trump could have 5 Republicans plus this guy.
Oh, so it's really time for a Democratic president to appoint a real Democrat.
Yes, a real Democrat. And so now DSA's campaign comes in. The full name of DSA's campaign is DSA for USPS, for the US Postal Service, Dump DeJoy and Protect the Vote. DeJoy is the Postmaster General, hired by these guys. And Protect the Vote means that DSA in its campaign message is prioritizing the importance of a rapid postal service for voting by mail. And it's got a figure that says during the 2020 presidential election, 46% of Americans either voted by mail or with an absentee ballot. So that's way more than ever happened before. And many states, including New York State, said you no longer needed an excuse for an absentee ballot. You could get one by citing temporary illness, and it didn't have to be your temporary illness. It could be the COVID pandemic.
Yeah. So is this campaign a campaign by DSA alone, or are postal unions involved?
Okay, this campaign is DSA's campaign. There is a much broader campaign called the Save the Post Office Coalition, and DSA is trying to cooperate with them. Postal unions are involved, but not to the extent that they should be. This is my opinion. This is DSA's opinion. This is the opinion of some postal workers who have been taking part in DSA's campaign, because they aren't unified. There are 4 different postal workers unions. And they organize different subcategories of people that work for the post office.
Uh-huh.
Over history, they've gotten good settlements. And I want to say something about how good it's been to be a post office worker. The average salary of a USPS worker is $55,000 a year, which is pretty good. 21% of postal employees are Black. So this is a higher representation than there is of Black people in the population as a whole. And it's a much higher representation than Black people have in other unionized lines of work.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like those are pretty good jobs. At least many of them are, although they're difficult jobs because you're out in all weather for most of them.
And they've been getting more difficult because some of them have been going unfilled.
Oh boy.
Which means the remaining people have to work a lot of overtime.
Yeah.
Now you get money for overtime, but you also lose a lot of time.
Yes, but we don't have much time left. So DSA has a campaign. What should people do?
People should try to influence President Biden not to keep these 2 Board of Governors members after December 8th. And how can people influence Biden? Well, one obvious way is to write him a letter. And with luck, it'll get delivered. Well, or write him a postcard and or leave him a message on the presidential website at the White House. All good things to do. Phone the White House. But DSA has concluded that he's more subject to pressure from Congress than he is to pressure from individual voters or individual members of the public who might not even all be voters. So besides pressing him directly, DSA says, put pressure on senators and representatives.
Okay.
And send them postcards, send them letters, send them email messages, send them petitions. DSA has discovered something that I had not realized, even though I'm a longtime campaigner to get legislatures to do various things. Namely, staffers of senators and representatives have to log in all the mail that their senators and representatives get. They don't have to log in emails. So emails may get ignored, but at least at a minimal level, pieces of mail that come in don't get ignored. The staffer has to write down, I guess, who wrote and what they wanted.
Okay. So 2 quick questions. Are you suggesting specific names that he should appoint?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
It would be nice to be able to say, oh, you got to appoint this postal
Okay,
employee.
fine. And with 2 appointments, will there be enough people on the board to dump DeJoy?
As of now, apparently there will. If all the Democrats vote together, and with luck, they will. They might not. They have a lot of independence in what they do.
So it sounds like there is hope for the post office, especially if we all work on it.
Yes.
Thank you, Wayles Browne, for telling us about this situation and what we can do about it.
Glad to spread more information if you wish.
This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2,